Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Blue Japan, but you could call me Mr. Blue for short if you like. And I'd like to thank you for tuning in to the Sandwich of Coherency podcast, and we're going to try and cram as many coherent and incoherent thoughts into a short time frame. I'm going to try and not keep it too long. We know people have to get on with their days and a lot of stuff they want to do. So we're going to try and squeeze as much as we can into a short time frame to kind of keep it going as fast as possible. Now, for those of you listening, you're probably wondering why it's called the Sandwich of Coherency. And that's because in each episode, we're going to feature a sandwich. One sandwich from different places around the world as a way to bring people together through the idea of having food in the background. It's just kind of something to think about. So we're going to try and bring all that together and try and learn something new to try and fill people's minds as well as their stomachs at the same time, and we're going to see how that goes. So let's go ahead and let's jump right into it. And one of the first things we want to talk to you about today is what's happening in New York. Now, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the vaccine mandates as well as the vaccine passports that they are implementing throughout New York. But one of the things that seems to be on the forefront and is getting talked about in multiple different angles, and we're going to try and jump into that conversation, is the mandates for medical workers and medical professionals. So before Governor Cuomo left office, one of the things he was putting into place was a mandatory vaccination for medical workers and health professionals. Now, as he left office, the new incoming governor has decided to keep that policy in place. And what she stated just a few days ago was that you either get vaccinated or you will be replaced. And she said she would expand on that, and a few days later she did, and what she came back with was you will be replaced with foreigners. And she threw out specifically the Philippines, so that kind of gives us an idea of where they're going with this, because she tried to backtrack it to implementing European countries into that conversation. But the whole idea is that we're in a time of having a shortage of medical workers, and so their thought is to remove them. And this is important because these people have worked continuously throughout this entire pandemic before there were any vaccines. Now, they have been on the front lines and they've been dealing with this. And now they're also dealing with the vaccinations. So we have to take into account that at this current moment, the people who you're supposed to listen to, the doctors, the nurses, and you have it coming from both sides. You have those that are on the side of you should get it, and you have those that are on the side of they're not going to do it. And it's just everybody's picking a side. Which one do you want to be on? But if you're picking those that agree with your narrative and not looking at the other side, then you're missing a lot of what's happening in the middle. The fact that there are so many health professionals and medical workers that are refusing this, to the point where the governor is trying to make it mandatory and threatening them with the thought of replacing them. Now, that's a form of what's the word we want to say? It eludes me at the moment. Coercion? Yes, that is a form of coercion over someone's bodily autonomy that starts a precedent that leads down a path of what happens next. You've given them this window to do this, and one example we can look at with that is the ban on trans fat in New York, where you have the citizens go to the government and tell the government, we want you to ban this. Tell these restaurants not to serve this to us, because it should be on them to make the choices for me as to what I put into my body, because I know I shouldn't eat there. I know this food is not necessarily good for me. Trans fats are not good for anybody. But rather than taking the initiative to do it myself, I want the government to do it for me. And that's exactly what they did. And shortly thereafter, they turned around and they decided they wanted to ban, I believe it was 64-ounce sodas, and banned the 3-liter sodas because of health and the fact that all that sugar and high fructose corn syrup causes things such as obesity. And there was a huge pushback from the very same people that begged to have trans fat removed, that wanted to keep these massive drinks. And the reason for it was they didn't feel the government should be allowed to impose and make decisions as per their personal health and their bodily autonomy. Now, the fact that they're wanting to replace American workers with foreign medical workers, and they've already been talking about trying to change the licensing rules to allow this. So the question then becomes, are those that are trained, and it's not to say that the training they have is any less than what you would get in the United States or any other country, but one has to ask themselves, is the training that's being done for nurses and doctors in other countries the same as the requirements necessary to operate in the United States? So there's a larger implication. It's one thing if you wanted to do this to say, bring in farm workers or people working in, say, retail or in the trades business. That's a lot different than when you're dealing with people's health. So we're probably looking at quite some time before they would implement something like that. But at the same time, if they're already to this point, I believe September 27th is the deadline to have it. I could be wrong with that. But if they're already at this point to where they've already decided to make this public, we will replace you with foreign workers. This means that they're further along with this idea and have probably put steps in place that are going to roll out, and people will be happy with the idea. They'll be like, oh, look, we've done this. We have a fix. Not realizing that these things take time, which means they had to have been working on this for a while, which means they would have known that these workers would have said no to getting these vaccines. So they want to replace people who believe in their idea of choice and freedom with people that don't believe in that. And the question is, and just people can say this is ethnocentric, whatever, but the question comes down to, will they be choosing workers from foreign countries where the government in control is more authoritarian? If they're coming from authoritarian regimes, that would translate very well, bringing them into a setting to where you're literally telling them, do this, put this in your body, even if it's against your better judgment, because you know they will comply. So let's go ahead and move away from that, and let's skip on down to what's happening down at the Southern American border. And in the past week, we've come to realize that out of nowhere, there were 15,000 Haitian migrants down at the U.S. border in Texas, down at the Del Rio Bridge. Now, so far, there's reports coming out saying there's around 30,000 Haitians have already been let into the United States. And you hear there's 15,000 down at the border, which means, hey, maybe they've been coming in for a lot longer than people have realized. But what's important is that if you notice over the past year and a half, we've been privy to large caravans that are coming from south of the border and marching their way up to and through Mexico towards the United States. There was no shortage of news reports whilst Trump was in office of caravans of 5,000 people, 10,000 people, There was no shortage of those. They were all over the news. You knew they were coming. It sparked a major conversation, and there was vitriol coming from both sides. Now, the question now has to be asked, how do 15,000 migrants from Haiti make their way, as the news reports say, from Mexico to the U.S. border without being noticed at all? There was really no major reports, nothing leading up to this. It just really kind of popped up on the news. 15,000 Haitian migrants are at the border. And one has to wonder if this was done to serve a purpose. And I say that because you can look at what's gone down with the Border Patrol on horseback, whipping their reins around, and those images being shown and portrayed to the general public as if they were whipping the migrants. Now, these Border Patrol agents have been on horses for a long time. They didn't just start riding horses when Haitians made it to the border. So one has to ask, why were these images of these types of things not shown before? Why were these not presented to the general public as mistreatment of people migrating their way towards the U.S. border before? And I'm telling you, it's mainly because they want to put this image of the Border Patrol and the ICE agents as being these nefarious, notorious, racist, because they were quick to use an image that looked like black people being whipped, and they used that as a way to incite thoughts of slavery. And I believe it was Maxine Waters who said that this was worse than slavery. I don't know. Border Patrol agents using the reins to move their horses doesn't seem quite as bad as a couple hundred years of slavery. Maybe that's just me, but judging from what I've read from history and have looked at, I don't see how one could even attempt to conflate the two. And as much as I try to avoid it from coming back to it, this does come back to the whole vaccination and the testing talk. Whereas you have the White House press secretary stating that it is not a requirement for these migrants to be tested or to be vaccinated. So far, over 1 million immigrants, as they've stated, illegal immigrants, have been let into the United States. And the one question is, how many of these do you believe are actually tested? How many of these do you believe are actually vaccinated? And we have to remember that during the beginning of the pandemic, they didn't even have enough tests, as they stated, to test the general populace of American citizens to begin with. So throughout that time, their illegal immigrants are being pushed into the United States. These people are not being tested. You can't sit there and be told we don't have enough tests for the people we have here, and then firmly believe that they had enough tests to test the people who were coming in. So, as she stated, as Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, stated, they will be tested if they show symptoms. What does that mean? If they're showing symptoms, does it mean you're having a medical professional check each and every one of these people? Or are you asking them and they're telling you and you're just believing it? Because if you're having them talk to a medical professional to assess if they're showing symptoms, then why would you not test them? Why go through all that trouble if you weren't going to test them? Whereas the reality is you're giving them questionnaires or you're just having someone ask them real quick, and it's more or less like saying hi and bye in passing. And that's a major question that has to be considered. Is there any correlation between unvaccinated spikes of COVID, as they say, versus over 1 million illegal immigrants being let in? And one can only imagine, or one can rather not even begin to imagine, how many were tested or vaccinated. Now, in this next section, one of the things I want to look at is I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the migration situation. Now, we have migrants in the United States at this current moment that are living on American military bases. This is not a new phenomenon. This has happened before. It did happen during World War II, and as well, it has happened most recently as during the Obama-Biden administration. During that time, they had only about 2 to 3 bases that were holding around 2,000, maybe less, illegal migrants. But currently, in this past year, under the Biden White House administration, they're up to around 6 bases. And reports as just a few months ago, you were looking at, they were building housing to accommodate around 6,000, as far as being as one of the bases down as Texas. So this in its larger picture brings a conversation to what people that call themselves Republican, people on the right, conservatives, feel about fiscal situations and the funding to pay for such things. You have to look at, in the United States, you have homeless people, you have homeless vets, homeless families. These are things that comprise of that homeless population. You have single mothers, single fathers, and what they're trying to address to people is, look at, financially speaking, look how much money is being spent to care for the refugees as well as the illegal migrants that are coming in to the United States. They're coming in with nothing. They're being provided with housing, medical care. There's a whole lot that's being done for them, and it comes at the expense of the taxpayer dollar. Now, they're not saying that people don't deserve help and we should not help them, because we should. At the utmost, we should be helping people who need help. But that's their larger argument. You have thousands upon thousands of American citizens that actually need that help. They want to address how quickly they were able to build housing for illegal migrants coming from all over the world into the United States. But there's so many roadblocks for American citizens to get housing if they're homeless or on the verge of losing their housing. That's a really big situation, because when you look at the amount of money that it takes, this is not a few $100,000. It takes millions upon millions upon millions of dollars each month to house everyone that's coming in. And then you look at a situation such as what's been happening in California with the uprise of their homeless encampments, and the same thing happening in Oregon as well as the state of Washington. It's kind of a slap in the face to people when you see that their government is able to find help and aid immediately for their own people. Like I said, the amount of hoops that they have to jump through makes it nigh impossible. So it's not to say that the American government or the American citizens do not care about the well-being of others. It's just that in the end, it makes them feel like their very own citizens are getting the shaft on this. So, I also want to step back and go back to mandatory vaccinations. And one of the things I didn't address is the legality of all of that. And it's a big question. There's a precedent that this was set. And that's the implementation of the things that you can and can't do with your body. And that's giving that control, like I said earlier, to the government to do that. So I'll give you an example. It may seem far-fetched and it might seem a little overblown to the extreme. But one thing, if anything, we've noticed when it comes to government, they are no stranger to going to the extreme. Because those that are sitting in office, these things don't affect them. So the consequences, they're not the ones who bear the brunt of that. So let me address this. If they're using studies that they're saying to justify what they're doing, who's to say that for having safety to prevent such things as school shootings, rising cases of violence in public schools throughout the United States. If they say that they found or they have, medical backing, there's proof to justify it. What if they wanted to give children mood stabilizers? Use those as a way to quell such awful situations from happening. It is for the safety of the general public, they could say. And one of the arguments that people are using to justify mandatory vaccinations now are the child vaccination cards that you had as children that showed what you're up to date on. I don't see how it could be far-fetched to make that a part of it. Who's to say why could they not justify, given the climate we're in? People are saying that the unvaccinated and those who refuse to get the vaccine should be separated from society. Could we justify giving our children going into school mental evaluations? And those that they deem to be a risk or a potential problem, either at that moment or in the future, could then be removed from the general populace and keep those children separate from the ones they deem will be better off? Here's another one. How about birth control given to all young women at the age of puberty in order to prevent them from having pregnancies? The argument that people use on the left and the right, this is a far extreme that could be viewed as a potential reality. If you think about it, the hundreds of thousands of abortions it would prevent, the amount of abortions it would prevent from rape situations, incest. To be able to do that, you would actually more or less kind of quell an argument on both sides. Now, look, I'm just a regular person. I'm not somebody who's claiming to be an expert in any of this. I'm just having thoughts. And these are my thoughts. What if? I'm not picking a side. I'm just having a thought. Now, let's say that that's the case, and let's say they could do that. They could do the same to boys. All boys have to have their testicles snip tied, I guess, if it's a vasectomy, not a full vasectomy, have them tied until they're reach an age deemed appropriate, or they've proven they could handle being a father. It just leaves all types of possibilities, because it's something that could be thought of being implemented. It's not far-fetched. Probably be regulated like they do with driver's licenses, marriage licenses. It's not too far-fetched. Like, you need to be of a certain age to buy alcohol and tobacco and firearms. So I don't see that being something that is out of the realm of possibility. You know, because it gives the choice. You can choose when to have a child, not before. But it's still at the behest of the government. And the thing is that people fail to realize is when you want to implement these things, you want to force one side's view on another's. You want to take away people's choices like that. You have to remember, those that are in charge right now won't always be in charge. Regimes do change. But the laws that you put on the books now will still be there. So you have to remind you, it goes back, you know, you have to be careful and not be so hasty in wanting to give up freedom for a little bit of security. So that's it for today. And today we're going to talk about a sandwich. Today's first sandwich, which was a suggestion by Mel, I thank you very much, is an herb-crusted roast beef sandwich. She gave me some ideas. And so this one's coming out from Australia, so we'll count this as an Australian sandwich, and I came up with some ideas for it. How about we're thinking about an herb-crusted roast beef sandwich on sourdough with roasted red peppers, roasted tomatoes, as well as roasted onions. We'll have some chipotle mustard mixed with sour cream, and we will top that with some Swiss cheese. And we will cover it with gravy. And I highly recommend a fork and a knife with that, because that sounds like it will be a very tasty mess. Such as this first episode. I'm getting my bearings, and I thank you for tuning in. And I will catch you on the next one.